Gonzaga's roster is updated on the website with only 12 players listed thanks to a few walk-ons heading out the door. Also, some potentially exciting evolutions to discuss right here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Don't go away.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Folks, we got some FIBA results to discuss, a pair of Zags winning medals, Mark Few not among them. We'll talk about that. We'll also talk about Marcus Adams Jr., why he left Gonzaga, why he ended up at BYU, some speculation, some thoughts on that to close out the show. But first, Gonzaga's roster has been updated on the website, gozags.com, 2023-24. Men's basketball roster is up there. This usually every year there's one or two different kind of revelations that come out of the roster coming out, whether it's a new walk-on on the team, a walk-on that people expected to see who wasn't there, some different jersey numbers for players, some height and weight changes. We're going to kind of go through all of the changes we saw on the roster, discuss what that might mean for the team, starting with the fact that there are only 12 players on the roster. That is a surprisingly small amount of players on a Gonzaga basketball roster. Of course, we know some of the reasoning for that. We'll discuss it at the end of the show with Marcus Adams Jr. being a late player who decided very late to leave the program after joining the program fairly late as well. Kind of quite a saga there with Adams Jr. We also know, of course, Caden Perry was forced to medically retire, or has, I suppose, made the decision to medically retire. I don't know if he was forced to do so, but he has decided he is not going to be able to continue to play, so he's leaving the program. The other ones that were on there that I hadn't caught ahead of time, Abe Eagle, who's been with the Gonzaga basketball program for a couple of years. He was kind of the walk-on alongside Colby Brooks. The two of them were kind of always connected together. Both came in at the same time, and Abe Eagle was not listed on the roster. I went back and looked at his Instagram. He actually posted about 3 weeks ago that he is going to walk away from being a Division I college basketball player. I had missed that at the time, but we have the opportunity to discuss it now. And it's always kind of interesting when you see this, because I don't feel sad for Abe Eagle, and I don't mean that in like a dismissive way. I mean that this is a young man who got to score points for Gonzaga basketball's program. He scored 4 of them. This last season, his first time being not redshirting, his first time actually being a member of the active roster. He played in 5 games last year. He played 11 total minutes. That's what you normally see from walk-ons. They play a handful of games at the very, very end. The last 90 seconds or so typically is when Mark Few fully empties the bench. He scored 4 points on 2 of 3 shooting. He had a board and an assist. 2 of 3 from the field, like I said, 0 of 2 from the free throw line. And I remember when he scored, he had a little like kind of step back fadeaway shot that he hit, and the crowd went crazy, the bench went crazy. And those are always just some of the best moments every season when they happen, is getting a chance to see a player step out. And it's funny, Gonzaga's walk-ons always tend to have kind of there seems to be a pattern. There's always one who's like uber athletic, who you kind of wonder, hey, could this guy really play for, another program? Could he be a Division I basketball player at a lower level? Colby Brooks kind of fills that role right now. In the past, they've had other players. Connor Griffin, who's now a video coordinator for the Denver Nuggets, always kind of stuck out as that. He ended up playing football for the University of Washington after he left Gonzaga. And then there's always kind of another guy who maybe it's not as obvious that they could be in that situation, but there's still, somebody who you think, hey, it's not surprising that they're at least contributing at practice. Abe Eagle was 6'8", 6'9". He's a big dude. You don't normally see guys that big walk on to basketball programs. He was an accomplished high school basketball player as well. So I'm happy for him. I'm hoping that this decision is something that he is okay with. I don't know if he's staying at Gonzaga or not. That was not clear. I suspect that he is. But, always cool to see that. Kellen Mitchell also was a walk-on who was listed on Gonzaga's roster last year, who is not currently listed on Gonzaga's roster. He never played. I don't think he was ever a member of the active roster, in the sense that I think he was kind of a redshirt walk-on, just somebody on the roster. But he is no longer listed on the roster. Like we said, Caden Perry no longer on the roster as well. So the Zags are down to 12. And I know some people, I saw this on the Discord channel, which, by the way, if you would like to join the Discord channel, we're talking 24/7 about basketball, Gonzaga basketball in particular. There's a link below in the show notes. Anyway, somebody asked if losing Abe Eagle and Kellen Mitchell, the concern in terms of just having enough bodies at practice. Gonzaga is going to add more walk-ons. This 12-man roster is not finalized. They will add somebody. They typically don't make that addition right away. They wait for the school year to get started. They'll have some tryouts, etc. I know for a fact that Mike Hart watched Craziness in the Kennel from the stands with many people who I consider friends, now close friends of mine, watched Craziness in the Kennel as a freshman with Mike Hart. He ended up on the basketball team about a week later. So that totally can and will happen. So Gonzaga's roster is not set at 12. Whether they make a big addition or whether there are just smaller additions that come, hard to say, but I suspect we will at least see a few more walk-ons added to this roster. Jersey numbers, new jersey numbers for the Zags, all low number guys for the most part. Ryan Nembhard is going to wear 0. He did wear 2 at Creighton, but 2 is going to be worn by Steel Venters, who also wore 2 at Eastern Washington. Luka Krajinovic is going to wear 3, the same jersey number he wore last season in Croatia. And similarly, just Dusty Stromer is going to wear 4, just like he wore in high school at Notre Dame. And then Graham Ike, who wore 33 at Wyoming, he's going to wear 32 for the Zags. I saw some people up in arms on the internet, on Twitter, about Steel Venters wearing number 2. I thought it was funny that there was a lot of people upset that Steele's wearing number 2. I didn't see anybody upset that Krajinovic is wearing number 3. It's just one of those things that happens. They're not going to retire Drew Timmy's number right away. I just don't think it's one of those things that matters all that much. I don't concern myself too much with jersey numbers. It's just not that big of a deal to me. I don't think that Steel Venters wearing 2 should be viewed as anything other than the number that he wore at Eastern, and now he wants to wear it at Gonzaga, and that is what is happening. So I think we kind of just let that be. I'm sure some people will be upset about it, but it's not something personally that bothers me. Last thing I want to talk about with the roster is the height and weight changes. And I take this stuff with a grain of salt because there are so many factors that could be. And first of all, we know that heights are pretty much never reported super accurately. Both Ben Gregg and Braden Huff are listed at 6'10". I think they're probably both closer to 6'9". Not as confident about Huff. We haven't seen him as much. Ben Gregg strikes me as somebody who, when they measure him not in shoes at an NBA combine in the future, if he participates, he's probably going to show as being barely 6'9". That's a guess, but the heights are always something you take a little bit with a grain of salt. But looking at last year's roster and this year's roster, there are a few changes. Nobody's height changed. That has happened in the past, whether it's legitimate or just it was mismeasured one of the times, it's hard to say. But the weights did change. 4 players gained weight from last year to this year. Nolan Hickman is up 3 pounds from 180 to 183. Anton Watson is up 3 pounds from 225 to 228. And then the bigger ones, and these are noteworthy to me. Ben Gregg is up 5 pounds from 225 pounds to 230 pounds. Ben Gregg gained a lot of weight last offseason as well, and it showed in the way that he played more physical last year. He was tougher. He was stronger. He was better in so many ways. And his physical transformation was a big part of it. So him gaining 5 more pounds, presumably of muscle, based on just looking at him from the highlights that we've seen posts on Instagram, that's another good positive development for Gonzaga because they're going to need a lot from him this upcoming season. Braden Huff goes from 235 pounds to 242 pounds. Braden Huff is a big boy. He is a big dude. And presumably, as we've seen from so many Zags in the past, the jump from freshman year to sophomore year in terms of physicality, in terms of physical health, strength, endurance, all of that stuff is monumental. It makes sense. A Gonzaga level strength and conditioning program is light years ahead of even some of the more prolific high school programs in the country. So for Braden Huff, the amount of physical work that he did this year to get stronger and faster and more agile, it is showing. 7 pounds is a significant difference. Assuming it's all muscle, that is a huge development for him. We'll talk much more about Braden Huff in a future episode. We're going to preview all the players on the roster, what some of this stuff might mean for him, but his transformation physically is something that I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on heading into this season. Well, Kelly Olynyk and Filip Petrusev are both medalists coming out of the FIBA World Cup. Meanwhile, Mark Few and Team USA did not medal. What does it mean for America? What does it mean for Petrusev and Olynyk? All of that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, Athletic Brewing. Now is your time for the game changer of the week, brought to you by the Athletic Brewing Company. Much like Dylan Brooks for Team Canada, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. Brooks dropped 39 points against Team USA in their massive win in the FIBA World Cup, sending them to a bronze medal. We'll talk more about that. Meanwhile, Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good, full flavor, and well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer. Exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. All right, folks, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Zags your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners checking out the show on YouTube. Very much appreciated. We got a pair of guests lined up for later this week. I'm very excited about both these interviews, so definitely stick with us here into September as we get a chance to talk to some very fun guests on the show. For right now, though, we're going to talk about the FIBA World Cup, which finished itself in the last couple of days here as we're recording this, just finalized. We saw Germany take home the World Cup championship. They are the gold medalists for this year, their first time winning the gold medal ever, in fact, for this country. So very exciting for them. Meanwhile, Serbia finished second, and then Canada beat Team USA in a monumental overtime game, an extremely exciting game of basketball. Team Canada secures the victory 127-118. And they are walking home with the bronze medal. This is the first time the Americans have failed to medal in the FIBA World Cup in back-to-back years since 1970. Significant amount of time for the Americans to not show up on the world stage. Of course, this was not a roster that is the roster that they put together in Paris in 2024 for the Olympic Games is going to look a lot different. With no disrespect to this roster, there's a lot of significantly talented players on this team, but there's going to be, depending on whether LeBron James and Kevin Durant and James Harden, some of those older kind of superstars in the NBA decide to play or not, we will see. But there's going to be a more talented roster in Paris than there was for the FIBA World Cup. It's also worth pointing out that Paolo Banchero, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Brandon Ingram, three of the better players on Team USA's roster, did not play against Canada because of illness. That likely contributed, but this is the first major international medal for Canada since 1936. This is a huge deal for Canadian basketball, a huge deal. And for Gonzaga fans, it does matter because Gonzaga's history is interwoven with Canada basketball. Kelly Olynyk was the team captain for this team. It's been 80 years since Canada medaled in any kind of international competition. And the player who they determined was their captain for the first team to do it in nearly a century went to Gonzaga. That's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool fact. Now, Kelly didn't have a monster game. He had 11 points, 2 boards, and 2 assists. He only played about 11 and a half minutes. A little surprising considering how small Steve Kerr ran the Team USA team for a while. Josh Hart, 6'5". Josh Hart was basically playing center for Team USA because, again, we were Banchero and Jaren Jackson, being out really hampered Team USA's size in the front court. You'd have thought Kelly would have maybe dominated with a smaller lineup. He had an okay game. Again, Dylan Brooks went out and dropped 39. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Chet Holmgren's teammate with the Oklahoma City Thunder, he had 31. Monster performances from those two guys. Again, really happy for Kelly. Really happy for Team Canada to get this trophy, to get this medal heading into the 2024 Olympic Games. And again, Mark Few had a chance to coach alongside Steve Kerr and Eric Spoelstra. It's a bummer that it ended with them not getting a medal. I don't think it really means anything for Mark Few. This doesn't really have any bearing on his legacy in my mind. I think the opportunity to learn from Steve Kerr, to learn from Eric Spoelstra, to scout international talent, to see how the different countries play basketball and learn their styles and stuff, all of this is so helpful for him long-term at his job at Gonzaga that the results don't matter that much to me in that regard. Of course, I'm rooting for Team USA, but it's not one of those things that really I don't think impacts his legacy. And I think that the learning that he gets to do in other aspects is far outweighs the results on the floor for me as somebody who cares more about Gonzaga basketball than anything else. Again, Kelly Olynyk, not the only Zag to get a medal coming out of the FIBA World Cup. Filip Petrusev playing for Serbia. Serbia played Germany in that championship game. They lost. Germany went 8-0, dominated this FIBA tournament. One of the few teams to just go 8-0 and absolutely wreck their way through everything. This was a really fantastic German team. Dennis Schroeder looked amazing. Franz Wagner, former Michigan player who's now a teammate of Jalen Suggs with the Orlando Magic, he also looked amazing as well. Petrusev had 10 points and 4 boards for Serbia in this championship game. He played about 22 minutes. I'm really happy for Petrusev, not just for getting a chance to represent his country and help bring them home a silver medal, which is extraordinarily cool, but he's going to play for the Philadelphia 76ers this year. We've talked about it a handful of times on the show. For those of you who may have missed it, Petrusev signed. He was drafted by the 76ers back in 2021. Spent the last couple of years playing overseas, but now the 76ers are going to bring him over. They signed him to a 2-year contract. It's guaranteed. He's going to be a part of that roster this upcoming season. He will make his NBA debut. So what a tremendous year for Petrusev to represent his country and to get the opportunity to play NBA basketball, which has been his dream all along since he came over from Serbia, played at Mount Verde Academy in Florida, went to Gonzaga, left early in order to try to boost his draft stock. It all has come together in a way that will work out for him, getting a chance to play for Philadelphia this year. Looking ahead to the 2024 Olympics, it is really early to be doing that in the sense of trying to figure out exactly what all these rosters are going to look like. However, there are going to be Zags representing their countries at the Olympic Games. For Team USA, probably not going to be anybody there. Chet Holmgren was on the kind of satellite team for this FIBA World Cup team. But again, a lot of the players who actually played in the FIBA tournament are not going to make the Olympic roster because of players who chose not to play for FIBA, but who will probably play for the actual Team USA. I'd be very surprised if Chet Holmgren plays for an Olympic medal this year. I wouldn't be shocked if he does eventually. I think it's possible Jalen Suggs does. I think it's possible a handful of other former Zags potentially get that opportunity as well. But for right now, I don't think there will be any former Zags representing Team USA in the Olympics. For Japan, there's always Rui, but Rui did not have a particularly great experience last time at the Olympic Games, so I'm not sure if he will choose to do so again. Lithuania, Domantas Sabonis is probably going to play for Team Lithuania in those Olympic Games next year. He did not participate in FIBA, but again, a lot of superstars don't participate in these FIBA tournaments, so it's not surprising. Speaking of superstars, Serbia obviously will be in the Olympic Games. Filip Petrusev has a chance to be on that roster, but it kind of depends what happens with Nikola Jokic. Jokic did not participate in FIBA. We don't know if he's going to participate for them in the actual Olympic Games. If he does not, Petrusev has a much better chance of making the roster. If he does, that takes away a spot from a big, considering Petrusev was not one of the biggest minutes getters for this team during FIBA. I think he could be the guy on the chopping block right there. And then, of course, Team Canada. Kelly Olynyk's a lock. He's going to be an Olympian next year. That's going to be a fantastic accomplishment for him. Kevin Pangos and Kyle Wiltshire have participated with Team Canada in previous Olympic adjacent events, but neither of them made the FIBA World Cup roster. And when you consider the other talent that could join the Olympic team, players like Jamal Murray, who did not participate during the FIBA World Cup, but could participate in the Olympics, I think it's less likely that Pangos and Wiltshire will participate. However, there are other players who could join them. Andrew Nembhard is very likely a candidate to potentially join the Olympic team. He did not want to participate in this time because he's still a young NBA player, didn't want to risk injury coming into his second NBA season. Brandon Clark is also a player who is eligible to participate for Team Canada. He's, of course, recovering from an injury right now, so it was not surprising. In fact, there's no way he would have played with the FIBA team, but I think he's a player who could end up being on their roster in the future if he chooses to participate. Of course, hard to know what might happen with players like Jun Sak-yo and Luka Krajnovic, both currently on Gonzaga's roster from South Korea and Croatia, respectively. It's possible those two guys could participate in the Olympics in the future as well. Well, folks, we're going to close out today's show talking about Marcus Adams Jr. We haven't talked about this since he officially committed to BYU. We're going to talk a little bit about the situation, maybe some speculation as to why he chose that school, why he left Gonzaga in the first place. All of that coming up after a word from today's sponsor, FanDuel. Get ready for the NFL season, folks. It's here. It is here. As you are listening to this, week 1 is in the books, and there are some incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 back in bonus bets. guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use. You can bet on anything from point spreads to the money line to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer that you will not want to miss. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. Folks, segment 3 here, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, switching away from talking about the new roster and the FIBA World Cup championships to talk about Marcus Adams Jr. Marcus Adams Jr., of course, joined Gonzaga's roster in July of this offseason. He had decommitted from Kansas, and we specified decommitted, although he did technically transfer from Kansas. It was kind of a kooky situation. He had already enrolled at Kansas and started classes. So when he left them, despite having not started his college basketball career, he did have to technically enter the transfer portal. Committed to Gonzaga shortly afterward without visiting campus, seemingly kind of on a whim. I was kind of the read that I got. He said he decommitted from Kansas. A lot of Gonzaga players reached out to him, were talking to him, were telling him how excited they were about him. We would love to see you on campus, bro, blah, blah, blah. And I think that he kind of got swept up in it a little bit, got excited about it. Of course, Gonzaga is a premier program and the coaching staff is good at what they do. And they called him and they got him on board. But then after that, nothing really happened. And then he left. Somewhat suddenly, he decided to leave. He re-entered the transfer portal. And within a week or so, he had committed to BYU. He went and visited BYU. He went on campus. He did all that stuff, decided he was going to go to join the Cougars. Now, Marcus Adams Jr. is going to need a waiver to play this season. That is not new. He was going to need a waiver to play for Gonzaga, and now he will need a waiver to play for BYU. Whether the decision to leave again will impact that waiver status remains to be seen. I will never, ever make predictions on what kind of decision the NCAA might make because it is impossible to predict. If you want to learn a little bit more, check out my good friend and colleague Isaac Shade's show on Locked On Tar Heels about Tez Walker, a wide receiver who seemed like a slam dunk to get a waiver from the NCAA and did not. Regardless, Marcus Adams Jr. will need a waiver to play for the BYU Cougars. I want to read a quote from him. This was said to Deshaun London of 247sports.com. This is a quote from him about the situation. He says, "A lot of people are wondering why I jumped around from school to school, but it's obviously for personal reasons and I can't explain it just yet. For me, I was just trying to find the best place for me, not just playing wise, but scholarly and personally." So right now, the reasoning for Marcus Adams Jr. leaving Gonzaga is unknown. However, I want to state, I'm making an opinion here. I want to be clear about that. I do not believe that this was about playing time. And I think there are some pretty apparent clues as to why it is not that. I know people are jumping to that conclusion. People also jumped to that conclusion about Kansas, even though he never really stated that it was about playing time at Kansas either. Again, taking what a 17, 18-year-old says at face value, you got to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, but the automatic assumption that it's about playing time just doesn't sit right with me for a couple reasons. One, he never enrolled at Gonzaga. He also never joined the team for workouts. He wasn't really around the team. And I know that's viewed as a negative thing, and to an extent it should be. But to me, it's kind of an indication that the playing time argument just doesn't really hold a lot of water. Because if he spent time with the players, if he worked out against Jun Seok-Yo, if he worked out against Ben Gregg and Graham Ike, against Steele Venters, against whomever else kind of may have played some of the roles that he would have played, and then he left, I think that it might have kind of made a bit more sense. Marcus Adams Jr. joining Gonzaga in the first place never felt like a destination where playing time was going to be on the table. I believe that Mark Few and the staff are pretty honest with players about playing time. That does not mean situations do not change. There have been players who have left Gonzaga in the past, in the recent past, who felt like they were going to get more playing time than they got. Whether that means the coaching staff directly lied to him, which I do not believe, or whether situations changed, like certain other players transferred into the program, didn't leave the program, whatever it may be, I think that those situations do happen. But for Adams Jr., I think he came to Gonzaga and was told, hey, you'll compete for minutes if you're eligible, but we got, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so kind of in spots ahead of you. And I just don't see how his mind would have been changed if he wasn't playing against those players, if he wasn't, in Spokane, hanging out with them, interacting with them, scrimmaging against them, all of that thing. He didn't do any of that. So unless he just all of a sudden woke up one day and had an epiphany, wait, I'm not going to play there. I want to go somewhere else. That just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't feel right to me. However, the fact that Marcus Adams Jr. never enrolled at Gonzaga is telling. It's telling in the sense that there may have been some eligibility concerns from Gonzaga's admissions department. That would explain why he says he's not going to explain the reasoning for leaving Gonzaga just yet. It would explain why he used the word scholarly, describing what he's looking for in a new school. It's also important to note, folks, that Marcus Adams Jr. reclassified from the class of 2024 to the class of 2023 solely to get into Kansas. Reclassifying is difficult. You have to complete an extra year's worth of coursework a year early. Some schools are going to be more lenient about what courses you take in high school to get you into the school than others. This is not a diss on Kansas in any way, shape, or form, but Adams Jr. doing enough in high school to graduate early and get admitted at Kansas may not be enough at Gonzaga. It may not be enough at BYU. Hopefully he's figured that out before he went there. I don't know. Finding information on this is difficult. I'm not going to go, compliance staff's not going to tell me all the specifics of this. There's reasoning. You can't look at somebody's transcript, anything like that. But it stands to reason that reclassifying means that he probably barely has the requisite amount of credits to get into many institutions. It would stand to reason that certain institutions have different requirements and that Gonzaga may not have met those at Gonzaga. Again, to me, it explains more of what we have seen from his behavior and his words than a playing time complaint. That doesn't mean it's not the playing time. That doesn't mean I'm right. I'm offering an opinion here, but I've worked in college athletics. I've worked in academic support in college athletics. This is an area that I have a lot of familiarity with at WCC schools. So I know what this looks like. I know that the academic requirements at Kansas and BYU and Gonzaga are all vastly different. I will say the acceptance rate at these schools varies dramatically. Kansas is 92%. Gonzaga is 76%. That alone kind of points to what I'm saying. However, BYU is 59%. So that kind of puts a wrench in that. Maybe Adams already enrolled at BYU. Maybe they made an exception. Maybe his credits just worked in a way that made more sense at BYU than Gonzaga. This stuff doesn't always make sense on paper. It's just different. It's just different. Every school's different. They have different academic standards. I think it's possible, borderline likely, that something about Adams's credits from high school didn't work at Gonzaga and they work at BYU and they worked at Kansas because he already enrolled there. I just think assuming that it's playing time when he has to get a waiver anyway. Like there's no guarantee he's even going to be eligible this year. Why would he leave a school based on I'm not going to get very many minutes as a freshman when he might not play at all anyway? It just doesn't make sense. A 17-year-old kid making an irrational decision is of course possible. So me saying, well, it doesn't make sense, so it can't be that, not necessarily. It could be an irrational decision from a young kid who's just trying to figure out what he wants to do. But also a lot of signs point to this being something different than, oh, I'm mad that I'm not going to play over certain guys. There's a lot of things about that just don't quite add up. Who knows? We may never know. We probably won't know the very specific details if it is an academic issue. If he comes out later in his career and says, oh, Gonzaga didn't want me and, blah, 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 then sure. Then we can maybe kind of put the pieces together. But frankly, I don't really care all that much. I know I dedicated a whole segment to it and I'm still talking about it right here, but fan anger towards a player who spent 1 year or 1 month saying he was going to go to Gonzaga, but never actually showing up. It doesn't matter that much to me. It would have been nice to have him. He's a talented player. Might not have played this year anyway. Who knows? Was happy when he signed, was happy when he committed to Gonzaga, but this is just not something that bothers me. Yeah, when Gonzaga plays BYU, if they do, and he's on the roster, people can jeer at him a little bit. Sure, that's all in good fun. That's part of the deal, but this is a 17-year-old kid who's trying to figure out what he wants. He's having a hard time doing it. I feel more sympathy for him than I do anger for him not wanting to play at Gonzaga. That's just not an emotion that I feel about this situation. Hopefully it all works out for him, truly. I think it'll work out just fine for Gonzaga. It always tends to. So I'm hoping that Adams finds whatever he's looking for at his next school. Hopefully it's BYU, or hopefully if it's not BYU, he finds something that works for him, because it didn't seem like for whatever reason it was going to work at Gonzaga. And if we never find out, we never find out. That's just part of it. All right, that's going to wrap us up for today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. 2 fantastic interviews coming your way later this week, so check them out. They will be in your feed wherever you get your podcasts. Of course, you can find us on YouTube as well, and go join the Discord channel. They're going to get an update ahead of time about who these 2 guests are going to be, maybe even an opportunity to ask some questions that I'll read out in the show. So if you haven't done so yet, find the link here in the show notes or on YouTube. Click on it. It's free to join. You get to talk with 75 plus other Gonzaga fans every single day. Very fun stuff going on there. All right, thank you all for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.